Hi, welcome to Edward Box Guitar Tuition. So, got another classic album inspection for you today, carrying on my series looking at shrapnel albums. So today it's Vinnie Moore's Mind's Eye. Now, I think this might have come out very tail end of '86 in America, but it was licensed to Europe on the Roadrunner label in '87. I can't be sure what date it came out because I couldn't find that. There's no dates anywhere, only the year of release. So I'm doing this video today, January 28th, just slotting it in here. But I think it came out in the spring. I've got a feeling it came out in the March of '87. I have a vague memory of listening to it on my Walkman when I was on a school trip to visit Heysham Power Station. So for the uninitiated, Heysham's a place near a place called Morecambe, which is a bit like Blackpool, and it had a massive power station. There you go. Random information there. So, what's Mind's Eye like? It's kind of building. It's the first instrumental album release since McAlpine's Edge of Insanity. So there's quite a big gap there. But after this, there'll be more instrumental albums. But I think stylistically, McAlpine kind of set the shrapnel template that you're going to have a lot of shred, you're going to have pretty concise arrangements and melodies, and Vinnie Moore's the same. What I would say with this album is a little more progressive. It's got longer songs, which I think it doesn't benefit from totally. But the sound of the album, sort of typical shrapnel sound, bombastic drums and woofy bottom end. But Vinnie Moore has a very pure tone. He doesn't have a massive amount of gain, or it doesn't feel like he's got as much gain on his lead guitar sound. So he has a sweet tone. So the first track I ever heard of this was the title track, Mind's Eye. So that was on the Friday Rock Show with a DJ called Tommy Vance. I don't think he was as enthused about it as he was with McAlpine, because he totally raved about McAlpine. But then the next track was the opener, In Control. That was the next one I heard, and then after that I'm like, right, I think when the album came out, I pretty much bought it straight off. So In Control opens up. It's a really cool track. It's got a great kind of stop at the start, and he does this incredible run, and you can hear the difference between Vinnie Moore's picking and McAlpine's and Malmsteen's. It's very clean, it's very metronomic. Quite often he'll kind of palm mute as well. But it's not lacking feel, it's just kind of got a cleanness to it. It's not as aggressive, but it's good. There's a really good melody on this, like a lot of shrapnel tracks, it tends, once it gets into the verse, it's just power chords chugging away in a Frisian dominant mode, and then the melody comes over the top. So I'm not sure what happens with these songs, whether the artist wrote backings first or they came up with a melody and then constructed a backing to fit it. The drums are by Tommy Aldridge, are very good, of course, and Andy West, who's in the Dixie Dregs, really good. And on keyboards is Tony McAlpine, and he does some cool trade-offs with Vinnie Moore. He does one on this track, I think. It's a really good opener, really strong. Track 2 is really strong, Daydream. I'll just say these tracks are 4 minutes 37 and 4 minutes 30. So they're already longer than the McAlpine tracks. This album's about 43 minutes. So typically McAlpine songs would be under 4 minutes, 3.5 minutes, sometimes under 3. Occasionally you get a track over 4 or 5 minutes, but not often. But this is, like I said, tracks are a bit longer. Daydream's really cool. Great solo. Really good melody. Again, as a top, like McAlpine keyboard solo later on. And it works really well. So 2 really strong tracks. Next track, Saved by a Miracle. This is a little longer. Starts off with a sort of classical guitar type intro. Then he does some really good speed picking, flat picking on a nylon string, a la Malmsteen. Again, with this you can hear the cleanness of his pick attack. And he's feeling for sort of melody, and Vinnie Moore did quite long extended runs, but it always resolved to something melodic, and he's got quite a sort of freeform vibe. I don't like this track as much. It's good. It's got an unnecessary drum solo in it. I don't need drum solos, even though Tommy Aldridge is great. But he kind of goes into a time signature, the sort of 12/8 triplet thing, that I think gets used a bit too much in the album. But it's a good track. Then Hero Without Honor comes next. Again, it's got the same sort of feel, but it's got a really cool intro, ballad intro. He does some lovely whammy bar slurring, Vinnie Moore. So this is a popular technique with the shrapnel guitarists and other guitarists at the time, was using the bar, which they all got off Holsworth really, to swoop and scoop a bit. Vinnie Moore's subtle with it, and he's nice and controlled. So again, this is a nice track, a good track. I'm not as into it as much as the first 2. 7 minutes 19, longest track on album, so again a lot more progressive. And that finished side 1 of the original vinyl. So side 2 opens with Life Force. Again, it's a similar feel to me. This one's 3 minutes 54. It's possibly my least favourite track on the album, this. It kind of doesn't stand out as much. I think on this one he does a kind of cool pivot lick that he actually showed on his instructional video. So back in '87 he released an instructional video, Hot Licks video. A lot of players, myself included, were able to see this video, and a friend of mine had it, I borrowed it off him. And you could watch his techniques, his picking, his sweep picking and so on. Then you've got NNY, that stands for No Name Yet. So it's kind of taking a leaf of YRO Ingwe rip-off from Racer X. This is a really cool track. This has got a lot of energy to it. I really like this track. I think as the feels changed, it feels like the vibe shifts on this track. It's quite aggressive, his solo on this. I really like it, and it pumps along. It's one of the shorter tracks on the album, and it benefits from that. It's to the point. And then track 7's Mind's Eye, which I mentioned before briefly. So this is quite interesting. You've got like a cool sort of Phrygian dominant riff. And then it kind of broke down in the middle section to a kind of ballad bit where he did some really nice playing. So it's a good track, it's quite interesting. Again, it's 3:25, so it doesn't outstay its welcome. It's just to the point. I'm one of these guys, the instrumental guitar, I don't want going on ages to songs because it's kind of too much guitar in a way. And then track 8's one of my favourite Shadows of Yesterday, sorry. Again, this is 4.5 minutes, so still a kind of reasonable length. It's got a good groove on this, nice melody, and he's a really spectacular solo at the end that really builds up. He's got a great fade out solo, one of the best breaks on the album. So it kind of picks up across those 3 tracks, and then it finishes with The Journey, which is a kind of obligatory ballad you get on the end of these albums. It's got a nice melody, it's a good track. Kind of picks up into, it's played in cut time, and it goes into kind of regular time, double time, I suppose you call it that. For the choruses. Again, I like this track, maybe not as much. So I've never liked this album as much as the McAlpine stuff. I had it back '87 I was really into Vinnie Moore for like a period that year. I think later on the next year I got the Time Odyssey album, and the problem with that for me was it was really long. It was like 60 minutes long. I think it had 10 tracks on it. Maybe it had 11 or 12, but either way, one of the songs was like 9 minutes long. It was very long, and I just wasn't kind of as into that, and I was kind of more into what McAlpine was doing. But since then, I've come back to the Mind's Eye album. It's a classic of this type of album, and it's an important one to hear in the history of shred guitar and shrapnel albums. Later on, the Meltdown album he did, that was his 3rd album, and that's kind of got a more of a hard rock feel. From then on in, he kind of drifted away from his neoclassical stylings, although he would come back to it on various tracks. But he got more into kind of hybrid picking and kind of more Steve Morse type of vibe, which you kind of hear in UFO. So it was only really his first 2 albums that were pure neoclassical. But if I was marking this, out of 10 in the first couple of tracks, I give full marks, and then a couple of 6s probably, so 3.2. Life Force, I'm not into, 4.5, 6.2. 6.8, I'm kind of 68 out of 100 there. This is a Hallmark album, so it's a 7.5 out of 10. Probably 7.5 out of 10. On a good day it'd probably be an 8. But other people would disagree with that. I'm sure there's people who swear by this album more, and I wouldn't say, like I say, I really like it. I just I never quite liked it as much as some of the other stuff. But in summarising, it is a seminal instrumental shred album of its time. If you've not heard it, make sure you check it out. Vinnie Moore's a fantastic player, and he continues to be a great player to this day. Cheers, thanks for checking it out.